Well, good morning, Flatbelly fellow travelers and coffee chat people. Another quick little video here. We had a meeting last night at Coffee Chat, and it was a summer meeting for sure. It was a little bit different. We had kind of a relaxing process of going through and discovering aspects of ourselves, which, through memories of childhood, could be of benefit to us. We went through, first of all, a little meditation to sort of set the stage for our memories to be clear, I would say. Perhaps there was other reasons for sure. And then one of the participants took us through a process of going back to when we were kids and allowing ourselves to play, essentially. A lot of people, end by taking life a little bit too serious. We become adults too adulterous or something. I don't know what it is, where that word comes from, but we become burdened, it seems like, as adults. If you remember back to when we were kids, we didn't have responsibilities. And it's not that, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with responsibilities. We have to live our lives and take care of our families and so on. But in the process, I think, we end by taking life sometimes almost too serious, to the point of it not being fun for stretches of time anymore. So that was valuable, but it helps us to see something about ourselves which can be empowering. That's what I saw anyways. I'm going to share with you a little snippet of a story, actually most of a story, which at first may not seem relevant to this idea of improving the quality of our lives, but I hope by the end of it that you will see, that I hope I'll be able to explain rather why I think it's relevant. So this little story, even though as you can see it's summertime here, it's a bit cool this morning, a few sprinkles of rain if you see something on the lens. I'm just walking in the rain this morning to get my fresh air. I would say that it may not be relevant because it's a bit of a winter story. But that's all right. I'm going back in time anyway, so why not go to a different season? The setting for this story is about February of 1976. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but that's all right. I was in grade 4, for those of you who use a different terminology, 4th grade. My brother, my second youngest brother, Pete, was in grade 2, and he was significant in this story. You'll see why. And in that year, in our family, skis were all the rage. Downhill skis, that is. Simply because we had never had skis where I grew up. I grew up in a big family. We didn't have a whole lot really materially, but we had everything, if you know the way I talk by now. And anyways, my aunt, one of my aunts used to visit every year. She brought to us a retired pair of her skis. They were adult lady skis. Boots, poles, the whole works. Downhills. Now, I had a lot of brothers at the time. I had 8 brothers in the household. 2 sisters were still at home. Had a few more sisters yet, but there was only 2 at home. And when winter arrived, there was a pecking order for those skis. My oldest brother, he hogged them for the most part, the early part of the winter. And then as time rolled on, he kind of lost his interest a little bit. And my second oldest brother began to hog them a little bit, I would say. Well, by the time February rolled around, I was kind of the third in the pecking order of those interested in them. So I got to use them. And on this particular day, for those 2 reasons, one, my second oldest brother had used them enough already, and 2, he had said it was basically a dangerous day to go skiing. I got to use them. Why dangerous? Well, because where I grew up, it was not as cold as some places in Canada. In February, it starts to get a bit warmer. You can get rains, you can get snow, you can get everything. but when it rains, a bit of snow will melt, and then it'll freeze. So you get snow with crust on top. And you also get bare patches of frozen grass on the fields. But in grade 4, with skis to use, all for myself, and a potential race. See, that's one of the things we used to do for fun as kids, is race. Potential race in mind, fear was not even, it wasn't relevant to me at the time. There was myself, my brother Pete, and a bunch of tag-along kids. Off we went. There was me carrying the skis out the door, and there was my brother Pete pulling the toboggan. Behind him, Pat. Behind him, Huey. Behind him, Rob. Luke was probably too young at the time. Yeah, Luke would have been a toddler for sure. Off we went to the field where we're going to ski. It was the one closest to our house that had a good hill on it. We call it the vetch field. Vetch was kind of a weed, a legume, which grew wild there. So that was the name of the field anyways. The field had a good hill for skiing and tobogganing because it went up, started kind of gradually so you could get a little bit of control, and then it dropped off really sharp for quite a while. You got some speed up, then it leveled off on the bottom so you could coast to a stop, and after that there was the fence and the railway. It took a little bit of time to get the toboggan set up. For me, it was just a matter of strapping on the skis and leaning on my ski poles and waiting for the toboggan to be ready. And the toboggan was loaded something like as follows. You ever see an old picture of the old toboggans? Ours was a wooden one about 7 feet long, went along straight, and it had a nice curl on the front. Well, the smallest kid, probably Rob, sat in the front with his feet up underneath that curl. Next was the next smallest, as kind of a filler between the little guy in the front and the driver, who was Pete. And how you hung on was, there was ropes on the side, you wrap your legs around the guy in front of you. And on the back, that was somebody who took up the rear, who often, if it was one of us, we'd stand on the back and hang on to the guy's shoulders in front to imagine we were skiing and to get the sheer thrill of the ride. And thus we were set up. The toboggan to the south, me to the north. Ready to go. On your mark, get set, go, I yelled. And off we went. I pushed the ski poles. I took a quick lead because skis tended to be faster than toboggans. Away we went. Down the gradual slope. I started down the steep hill, and there it was, right in front of me, what my older brother had talked about, the danger. A large, bare patch of grass. Now in those days, we had no formal or informal ski training. It was point the skis and go as fast as you could. No turning, no stopping until you ran out of hill. The bare patch of grass did not affect the toboggan because they were to the south. They missed the bare patch. But I ran right into it, and it was like the brakes came on instantly. There was no slip, there was no sliding on it. And on those skis, because they were set for adults, there's something called a DIN setting, which is a release setting. If you fall, the skis are supposed to come off. But because I was wearing adult skis, oversized boots which were tightened down as best I could, they did not release. Something else released as I flipped. I could hear the crack of my right tibia, otherwise known as a shin bone. I can still remember the sound of that crack to this day. It sounded almost like the splitting of maple firewood with a swift blow of an axe on a cold winter's morning. A pop and a crack all at once. And I lay there. Time seemed to disappear. There was no pain, but there was the sense that something was off because my leg was out of shape and I couldn't move it. I instantly heard Pete's voice. "Steve, are you okay?" "I need help, Pete." That's all I needed to say. And it seemed like within minutes, maybe seconds, Pete had help for me. It's amazing to me to this day. Here's a guy in grade 2. He was able to run, it was probably close to 500 meters from where we were to the house to get my two older brothers to come back. And a lot of that was uphill, but he did it. You see, Pete and my younger brothers, they weren't strong enough to be able to pull me on the toboggan back up to the house. But with the help of my two older brothers, I was quickly loaded on the toboggan, and they pulled me home, with my younger brothers beside me, asking and jabbering away, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And my older brothers pulling. By the time we got home, fortunately, Mom and Dad were just pulling into the driveway. They've been out shopping or something like that, with our 1972 Ford Econoline van. Now, Dad, being very frugal, only owned one vehicle at that time. It was a panel van, this Ford Econoline. It was used for everything. We would haul hay with it, building materials, sheep to the market, and all of us to church on Sunday. And church on Sunday was kind of interesting. I think about it now. No seatbelt regulations in those days. And each one of us would carry a kitchen chair out to the van, put it in, we'd sit on it, we'd go to church. When we come back, we'd bring the kitchen chairs back in. Fortunately, on this day, though, all the kitchen chairs were in the kitchen, and all that was needed was to open the back doors and slide the toboggan in with the efficiency of an ambulance gurney. And off we went to the Inverness Memorial Hospital. Now, the heating in that old van in the back was non-existent, so the snow and the ice stayed on the toboggan. When we got to the hospital, there was enough people there with helpers in the parking lot. Dad, my older brothers, younger ones who could help. I was carried in with a row of pallbearers, you might say, on either side, and hustled down to the emergency ward and slid from the toboggan onto the operating table, with pieces of ice falling onto the floor and beginning to melt as they went. It was Dr. Bernie McLean who attended to my leg. He quickly reset the tibia, and in his assuring words, everything was going to be okay. As was customary in those days, I went on to spend several days in the hospital. Don't know how many exactly, I don't remember exactly, but there were several days in the hospital. And coming from a small community and a large family, I had many visitors. It was an ongoing thing. People would drop in and leave me little gifts and little treats. It may have been a result of this ongoing receiving that I came upon a bag of peanuts. That might sound kind of strange, wouldn't it? In today's environment, a lot of times we don't see peanuts in public places because everybody's worried about allergies. But there were no allergies in those days, it seemed like, along that line anyways. In fact, there was even smoking in the hospital. I can remember the nurse having to tell the old guy in the ward, the bed next to me, to make sure he put his cigarettes out before he went to sleep. Oh, it was just a different day, wasn't it? And I came upon this bag of peanuts. It might have been something the nurses gave me, because they gave me treats whenever I asked them. But I received this bag of peanuts. It was a bag of Planters, salted and plain otherwise. No shells. It was the kind of bag that my brothers and I would have fought over as kids. Yet here I was, on my own, with nobody to fight over, and realizing that I have this bag of peanuts to myself. I also had juice, lots of it, because every time I asked the nurses, they would bring me any kind of juice I want. Apple juice, orange juice, tomato juice, my favorites. And I remember sitting there at one moment and thinking, I've got peanuts all to myself and juice. Who needs legs? And then something dawned on me. You see, up until then, for some reason, I felt a debt of gratitude to my brother Pete for having helped me in a time of need. I felt it was him more than anything else. Perhaps it was the way he was able to run and give everything of his life in that moment for me. Perhaps it's something akin to brothers in arms who've been through war or a battle and become even almost closer than brothers, because there's a sense that they owe their life or their current situation to the other guy. But the thinking about it in terms of what I could do to repay him, because I wanted to repay him something, it almost cheapened my sense of thankfulness to him, because I thought nothing would ever be enough to thank him. But having those peanuts and how much I was happy about having them made me realize the peanuts must be for Pete. They just must be. And in thinking that and making that decision, it was as though that debt of gratitude began to lift. That debt of needing to repay him began to lift. There was no more lien on my life. I put them in a drawer beside the bed, knowing for sure that when I went home I would take them. Sure enough, a few days later, I was released from the hospital, and I took those peanuts and cherished them. And when I got home, I gave them to Pete. And giving them to Pete, to this day, the thought of it gives me such a sense of satisfaction, because I knew those little tasty bites of flavor gave him something that I never could. Now you might ask Steve at this point, what is the point of a story like that? Well, of all the things we did in coffee chat last night, I'm only sharing you this one because this one comes from my heart that I remember. But of all the stories, if we can get to the point of remembering the story, not only intellectually, but from the heart, we can get to recognize ourselves in that story and how it felt to be us as children, and every once in a while glimpses of how it feels to be us today. And we can notice something really interesting. We can notice something of a similarity between ourselves then and ourselves today. See, in my story, I don't remember what jacket I was wearing. I don't remember what hat I was wearing at the time, or what mittens. Or any other story that I remember as a child. I don't remember that I might have had a band-aid on my knee. But I remember the sense of being me. Deep down, the sense of being me. And when I can think about it, and I invite you to do this if you have an interest in it, think back to a story, similar, a significant story in your life, a story that's especially uplifting perhaps for you, and think back into it, and become aware of the sense of how you felt in being you. And then become aware of your being aware of it. You will notice that it's the same you that exists today. Even though your physical body is completely changed, science proves this, there is almost no trace of the physical body that was you then, that was me then, on that hill, and the physical bodies that we are today. Yet there is something constant. And what's interesting too is that when we go to that place of being us, the sense, the awareness of ourselves being aware of the story with it in that time, we become as though at peace, total peace, and time stands still. And that's what we talked about before. It's almost like another aspect of self which is constant, where we have the individual existence of self, us physically, mentally, and what have you, walking around and somewhat always at odds with everything else because of dimensionality, right? But when we discover ourselves, the constant self, the same self then and the same self now, there is no time anymore. We get in touch, we get another glimpse. Once again, remember how we talked about before. We're talking about the same thing, this idea of getting to know ourselves. And the more times we can look at it from different perspectives, the clearer it can become for us. And this is just one more aspect of another perspective, which works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Hopefully it'll work for you, or even parts of it. Try it on for size. Childhood memories. We all have them. Some of them are very valuable. Some of them have lessons. But they all, if we remember them really, have elements in there of insights and visions and feelings of what it is to be ourselves. Ourselves on a higher level, on a constant level. The same self that we are now. And when we can get in touch with what we really are, that is very empowering indeed, especially when we feel it in peace and harmony and where fear is gone. Because where fear exists, there's limitation, right? But even myself, when I remember back to that story, lying there with a broken leg, there was no pain. It was as though time disappeared. I can feel that now, as clearly as I can feel it then. There is no time separation. Almost so many of the other details I forget, but that I will never forget. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, this will be on a video. Mosquitoes are starting to get at me. I'll turn this off, but feel free to chime in on the blog or do the contact us thing and get a hold of me if you have any questions. I will talk to you again. Bye-bye for now.